Let's cut live now, straight away to the Conservative conference, where I'm delighted to be joined live by Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State for Defence. Ben, first of all, thanks for the flexibility. The Prime Minister overran a little bit, and thank you very much for reshuffling your schedule. President Zelensky says it is now time to talk. Liz Truss, in an interview in the papers this morning, says, in effect, I wouldn't trust Putin further than I could throw him. Where do you stand on talks?
Well, I think talks have to be meaningful, and I think that's what President Zelensky is calling for. He doesn't want to be run round in circles by a Russian president that is potentially just carrying on. And I think my colleague, the Foreign Secretary, made the very astute observation that for someone who wants to talk, carrying on shelling innocent people and civilian areas of towns doesn't really look like he means it. But I think what we do want is, Ukraine to have meaningful talks, and that's what the president's after. But as I've said all along on this invasion, we have to judge Russia by its actions, not by its words.
Interesting that just a few moments ago the Prime Minister said there was never a chance that Ukraine was going to join NATO, and there was never a chance that Ukraine were going to reintroduce nuclear weapons upon their territory. So if neutrality and disarmament's conceded, then Putin has won. No, I mean,
what Putin wants is people not to have the freedom to choose their destiny. First and foremost, people. NATO doesn't choose people. It doesn't go around the world growing itself. People choose NATO, and Ukraine wanted to choose that path of NATO. And I think President Zelensky's comments about it was never going to join, or wasn't going to be allowed to join, I think is what he actually said, was based on the fact that you have to get all 30 members to agree. Britain was always a supporter of Ukraine joining NATO, but you have to get all 30 over the line. And I think what he was saying is effectively an observation of the fact. But I think what is also important, as I said in an article in January, that President Putin himself knows this isn't really about NATO. He wrote an article last July where he was very clear. It was based on a very bizarre view of history and a view that somehow Ukraine was Russia and Russia was Ukraine, and that was really the cause behind us, this sort of sense that he was uniting the people of the ancient Rus. And I think, as the Prime Minister said, the problem is if he's successful in Ukraine, it won't stop there, because in his own articles and speeches, he effectively lays claim to the Baltic states and other parts of what was either once the former Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. And I think it's really important people understand that when you have a president who writes and speaks like he does about sort of ethnic nationalism, and that he has sort of rights over them, then we should all worry for our own security. It's that type of language that led to the Second World War.
Pretty profound stuff. The final question is, I hope, equally profound as well, Ben. I think the last time you and I chatted was at a Royal British Legion event in Staffordshire, which was of itself very moving. You were delayed because of dreadful weather, but you were still utterly determined to be there, and you were, and the veterans were very, very grateful. Everything that you stood for when you served in the Scots Guards, everything you stand for as a democratically elected politician is at stake in this, isn't it? Are you conscious of that every time you clock in of a morning?
Yeah, I am. I've not only seen people fight for their own freedoms, I've visited Ukraine for 5 times over the last sort of 7-8 years. I've seen for myself the front line with the Donbass a few years ago. I'm also consciously aware that all of us have values that are incredibly important, and maybe in the past we've all taken that for granted. And I think there's something really inspiring about this tragedy, if I can say it that way, is that many of us, everyone all sort of thought, well, young people, they're interested in their iPhones and TikTok, but you know what? They hold the values as important as our grandparents do, and they're prepared to stand and fight for it. And I think that is something that we should all be inspired by, that there's a much younger generation out there, younger than you and I, anyhow, Alastair, who are really passionate about this awful invasion of Ukraine. And whether they come from the left or the right, they're all united. And I think, freedom isn't free. It's the inscription above the South Korean War Memorial. And I think we recognise that is the case, and the Ukrainians know it right now. That's why we're determined to stand by them, lead with our action, lead with our support, and we are helping them defend their country, and we'll do everything we can to continue that support.
Sure. Final, but I tend to say final, but just listening to that answer, one other point comes to my mind. that generation as well would not have remembered Hitler and the rest of it, but just to get a clear idea of the very nature of this enemy, not only one who is prepared to bomb tower blocks into submission, but as Priti Patel said earlier this morning, is willing to poison door handles in Salisbury and murder people, and even hack your phone in the middle of the Ministry of Defence. This is a pretty brutal, evil, indiscriminate enemy, is it not?
It's definitely a government that doesn't believe in respecting the individual, the rights of an individual, the human rights, the freedoms that we hold so dear, and it also doesn't have any respect, by the looks of things, to sovereignty. And I was the security minister when a nerve agent was used on the streets of Salisbury, had clearly no regard for international law on chemical weapons, nor indeed for Britain's sovereign integrity. That's a state of mind, that's a belief set, that's what we're seeing right now. And we should definitely worry that there are people out there who think that it is perfectly acceptable to do what President Putin is doing, and President Putin and his general staff think it is acceptable. Well, it isn't acceptable. And the one shock that President Putin has had is I think he thought that most of the international community would splinter and not all agree. They have agreed. He's got the heaviest set of sanctions I think we've ever seen against one country. We've seen lethal aid flowing in from countries across Europe, from, including countries that are traditionally more neutral, like Ireland, who haven't helped with lethal aid, but helped with other types of humanitarian aid. We've seen Belgium supply lethal aid. Britain, Scandinavian countries, and even non-NATO countries like Sweden and Finland have been engaged. His biggest shock is that he woke up one morning to discover the international community is totally prepared to isolate him and his economy. That's got to hurt, that will hurt. And at the same time, he's discovered that Ukrainians are brave, strong people who are going to fight for their country, every inch of it. And that is causing his so-called invincible army to prove itself as not very invincible.
Ben Wallace, good of you to join us on what I know is a busy day for you and a busy conference indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again.
I'm lucky enough to be near home. Thank you very much.
I heard you say that, and Tornado fighter jets are built in your constituency. You politicians never miss the chance to mention the home turf, and I don't blame you for a moment.
I live here. It's so nice to work on a Saturday near home.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the other side of politicians. It's just nice to be home at the weekend as well. You see, it's not just you, it's me, and it's Ben Wallace as well. The Secretary of State for Defence, light-hearted there at the end, but really fundamentally profound thoughts earlier on about, as the Prime Minister said as well, what is at stake in the Ukraine, and the willingness of the United Kingdom and allies to stand foursquare by them, but to recognise the rules of engagement, as you rightly pointed out,